Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to pull out the key ideas from research, saving you time but giving you the insights you need, sometimes with unexpected angles.
That's the plan.
Today, we're diving into qualitative social science research methods, specifically how they're used in missiology. Think of it as a quick way to get smart on how researchers actually explore and learn within really different cultural and religious contexts.
It's quite revealing, actually. Understanding these methods gives you a peek behind the curtain, seeing how complex it is to grasp different worldviews.
Exactly. Our source material really breaks down how researchers try to understand cultures. It's definitely more involved than just, watching from the sidelines.
Yeah, much more. And like you said, knowing the methods shows the sheer amount of thought that goes into understanding perspectives different from our own.
So that's really our mission for this deep dive. Get a good handle on the main qualitative methods, and maybe most importantly, understand why picking the right one, or maybe combining them, is so critical for finding things that are meaningful and, trustworthy.
That's the core of it.
Okay, let's unpack that. Why is choosing the right method so crucial? It sounds a bit obvious, maybe, but what are the actual pitfalls of getting it wrong?
Well, it's probably more critical than it first appears. Our sources flag a really common mistake. Researchers sometimes pick a method just because they know it well, or maybe it seems easy.
Rather than because it fits the question.
Precisely. It needs to fit the research question they're actually trying to answer. Think about the whole research process, right? You collect data, you analyze it, you check if it's reliable, and then you see if your findings really back up your conclusions. Every single step has to hang together coherently. If that first choice, your data collection method, is off, then everything else is built on, shaky ground.
It's like trying to build a house on sand.
Kind of, yeah. Or like that puzzle analogy you use, trying to solve it with the wrong pieces. You just won't see the whole picture clearly.
Right. So in this world of qualitative research and missiology, what are the main tools researchers reach for?
Our material points to three primary methods. These are heavily used by anthropologists, sociologists, and, psychologists too, though maybe to a lesser extent.
Okay, what are they?
First, observation and questions, which is based on participant observation. Second is interviewing, and that includes things like detailed life history interviews. And third, focus groups.
Observation, interviews, focus groups. Got it.
And what's interesting is they're often not used in isolation. Researchers frequently combine them, especially in what are called case studies. They use a technique called triangulation.
Triangulation, that sounds technical, like finding your position on a map. What's it mean here?
It's a similar idea, actually. In research, triangulation means using these different methods to sort of cross-check your information. By looking at the same issue through different lenses, direct observation, one-on-one talks, group discussions, you can spot consistent patterns, confirm what you're finding, and basically boost the trustworthiness, the validity of your results.
So getting different angles on the same thing.
Exactly. It builds a much more complete and reliable picture. Think of it like getting reports from several witnesses to the same event. Their combined stories give you a clearer view than just one person's take.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so before a researcher even picks one of these methods, what are the first steps? You can't just jump in and start observing or interviewing, can you?
No, absolutely not. The sources are really clear on this. You've got to lay a solid groundwork first. That means really nailing down the purpose of the research.
Why?
The why, exactly. And clearly stating the specific goal, plus understanding how the key factors, the variables you're interested in, interact in that particular situation. Only after you've really articulated that central research issue, then you're ready to ask the big method question. Okay, what approach is best going to let me gather and analyze the data I need to answer my research questions and see those indicators I'm looking for?
Right, you need the destination before you choose the vehicle. And the type of information needed, the nature of the data, that plays a big part too, doesn't it?
A huge part. Our material really stresses how vital it is to know what kind of information you need. And this leads to another key decision. Is your research mainly inductive?
Meaning the data leads to the theory.
Right. Patterns in the data help you build a new theory. Or is it deductive, where you start with a theory and gather data to test it, to support or challenge it? There's this concept, Jim Nelson's research cycle, which suggests that ideally, research should involve both. A theory that comes from good data should be tested, and a theory that holds up should still be checked against new data.
So it's not just one direction, it's a loop.
Exactly. It's a continuous cycle, always checking and refining. Not just data to theory or theory to data.
And how does that connect back to choosing the method? Observation, interviews, focus groups.
Well, the choice depends heavily on how well that method aligns with the kind of data you need for whichever approach you're taking, inductive or deductive.
Gotcha.
And the source points out something interesting. Missiological research, generally speaking, unless it's purely theological research, tends to be phenomenological.
Phenomenological, meaning?
Meaning it's focused on understanding people's lived experiences within a specific context, how they see and experience their world, rather than starting with preset theories to test.
So understanding from the inside out, kind of.
Yes, which often leans naturally towards inductive approaches, using qualitative data, that rich, descriptive stuff about people's experiences and viewpoints.
Okay, so we've picked a method. Now the tricky part, actually gathering the info. How do researchers make sure they're getting unbiased data, especially when studying cultures different from their own? That seems like a huge challenge.
It's a really critical point. The source underlines that researchers absolutely must be aware of their own cultural baggage, their assumptions. We all have them.
And they can color how we see things.
Easily. They influence how we interpret what we see and hear. And this is where Kenneth Pike's ideas about emic and etic perspectives are so useful.
Emic and etic. You mentioned insider and outsider.
That's the gist, yeah. Emic is the insider's view, understanding something from within that specific cultural context, considering their concerns, their meanings.
Yeah, right.
Etic is the outsider's view, more comparative, looking across cultures maybe. The example about color perception really makes this clear.
Ah, yes, the Samoa people in Papua New Guinea and the soft stones. Remind us how that worked.
Sure. So biologically, humans see the color spectrum pretty similarly. But how we categorize colors and what meaning we give them, that varies hugely.
Like English having primary colors, plus black and white.
Exactly, and countless shades. The Samoa also have 5 main color terms, but their understanding is tied directly to the soft stones they use for dyes, earth-based dyes.
So their focus is on the source of the color.
Yes, on the physical stones, not some abstract color wheel. It's a fantastic example of how language and culture shape our understanding of even basic things. The key takeaway is you have to grasp the local perspective to avoid just projecting your own onto them.
That's a powerful difference. So for missiological research especially, the push is to really adopt that emic view, to understand the context properly.
Absolutely. Researchers need to actively try to see the world through the eyes of the people they're interacting with. To really get their frame of reference, it takes real effort.
Okay, let's dig into the specifics of these 3 methods then. First one, observation and questions based on participant observation. What's that look like in practice?
So this method comes straight out of anthropology. It means the researcher basically immerses themselves in a community or a social setting.
Living there, participating.
Often, yes. Actively observing what's going on, taking really detailed notes, field notes, and then asking questions that come directly out of those experiences, those interactions.
So the questions arise naturally from being there.
Exactly. And the key is just watching isn't enough. You need to understand the meaning behind the actions for the people involved. Malinowski called it the native point of view.
Getting inside their heads, so to speak.
In a way, the goal is to appreciate the quality of their life, the logic, the rationale behind why they live the way they do, describing the group, their institutions, behaviors, even their material stuff and beliefs.
Okay, so it's deep immersion and observation-led questioning. How does plain old interviewing differ then?
Interviewing kind of broadens out the questioning part. It's more explicitly focused on getting people's thoughts, feelings, opinions on a specific research topic.
So less about just observing daily life.
It can be connected, but the interview itself is more directed. It covers a range, from very open-ended questions, maybe sparked by observations, all the way to formal, structured surveys.
Right.
The big difference from participant observation is that in interviews, it's usually the researcher who sets the topic and decides on the nature and the order of the questions.
More control for the researcher.
Generally, yes, rather than letting questions just emerge from the flow of life. And you usually administer these questions to enough people to see patterns and make comparisons. Ethnographic interviewing, specifically, really tries to get at people's lived experiences in their own words. Lots of rich qualitative data there.
Makes sense. And the third method, focus groups. What do they add to the mix?
Focus groups are interesting because they blend interviewing with watching group interaction. You gather a small group of people who know something about your topic.
People with relevant experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a facilitator guides a discussion. The real value comes from leveraging the group dynamic itself.
how people interact with each other.
Yes. You're not just getting individual opinions. You're seeing how people debate, maybe reach consensus, how they build meaning together. It reflects social dynamics and cultural understanding.
I can see how that would be useful.
Definitely. And it's great for maybe verifying things you heard in interviews or saw during observation. People in the group can confirm things or even challenge each other, which can lead to a more nuanced picture.
So each method has its own angle, its strengths, maybe weaknesses too, and that brings us back to triangulation, right? Using them together.
Exactly right. They complement each other beautifully. By combining them strategically, you can really play to the strengths of each one and, at the same time, cover the weaknesses.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine you're studying a particular religious ceremony. You might start by observing it carefully, just watching and taking notes.
Okay.
Then, you might do individual interviews with people who participated to get their personal feelings and interpretation.
Makes sense.
And finally, you could hold a focus group, maybe with community elders or experts on the ritual, to discuss its broader cultural meaning and significance.
So you get the action, the personal meaning, and the group perspective.
Precisely. Relying on just one method is like peeking through a keyhole. Triangulation really opens the door wider, giving you a much more solid, trustworthy understanding.
Okay, great. We've gathered all this amazing rich data using one or more of these methods. What happens next? How do you start making sense of pages of notes or hours of recordings?
That's the analysis phase, and its main goal in qualitative research is to figure out what all this information actually means to the people in that context.
From their perspective.
Always from their perspective.
Yeah.
And this nearly always involves something called coding.
Coding, like computer programming.
Not quite. It's more like systematically labeling or tagging chunks of your data, parts of your notes, interview transcripts, focus group discussions,
Okay, why?
to help you identify patterns, recurring themes, key ideas. It's how you extract the meaning. It's a process, really. You move from the raw data to descriptive statements about what you found, and then finally to interpreting the deeper meaning. And when you do this well, the analysis should start to reduce surprises. You might even be able to predict certain things within that context. When you get to the point where new data isn't really telling you anything new, just confirming patterns you've already seen, that's often called data saturation.
Meaning you've likely captured the main themes.
Yeah, you probably got a good handle on the core patterns. The crucial thing, again, is understanding meaning from the participant's viewpoint.
Okay, let's break that down. How would you analyze data specifically from observation and questions?
Well, with observation notes, researchers often start just by noting things that jumped out at them personally or things that seem really important to the local people.
Initial impressions.
Kind of. But the key is systematic comparison, looking at observations of similar events or situations over time to spot patterns.
Ah, the patterns again.
Always the patterns. Remember that example of the oil company and the Samo initiation ceremony, how they shortened it? Analyzing what they left out was just as revealing as what they kept in terms of understanding what was truly essential to the ritual for them. Pattern matching is a really helpful tool here.
So comparison is key.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this analysis can be inductive, letting themes emerge from the data, or deductive, testing specific ideas against what you observed. And comparing observations of similar events helps establish reliability. Are you seeing the same kinds of things consistently?
Got it. What about analyzing interview data, those transcriptions?
Yeah, that usually starts with getting really accurate, complete transcriptions. That text becomes your raw material.
Okay.
Then the coding begins. You can use existing categories, maybe from anthropology, like the outline of cultural materials, or you let the codes emerge from the interviews themselves.
Like recurring words or ideas?
Exactly. Key terms, concepts people keep mentioning, dominant themes. In that Samo study, for example, the whole economic aspect of providing food for guests at initiation came up again and again, so that became a major code. And life history interviews are great for understanding individual stories, but also for seeing what's common across people's lives in that society, and also what makes someone unique and idiosyncrasy.
Makes sense. And finally, focus groups. How do you analyze that data?
Similar starting point. Detailed transcriptions. But you also need good notes on the group dynamics. Who agreed with whom? Were there disagreements? How did they resolve them? Nonverbal stuff, too.
So the interaction is part of the data.
A big part. The coding itself is similar. You can use existing categories or let themes emerge from the discussion, but you pay special attention to the reasoning people used, where they found common ground, and maybe where the conversation went in unexpected directions.
Okay.
And then, just like with observations, you compare patterns across different focus groups on the same topic. That helps you build broader insights.
It sounds like there's a lot more to analysis than just simple coding, though. Any more advanced techniques?
Oh, definitely. Our source mentions content analysis, for instance. That's a more structured way to analyze texts, sometimes even quantitatively, looking for the frequency of certain words or themes.
Getting more systematic.
Yes, making it more replicable. You can analyze different units, like how much time is spent on a topic, sentence structures, underlying propositions, or those bigger thematic patterns.
Okay.
And there are other tools, too, like free listing, ranking exercises, pile sorts, different ways to get at how people categorize their world. And then there's grounded theory.
Grounded theory.
Yeah, that's a really important inductive approach focused specifically on building theory from the data up. It really emphasizes getting rich, detailed data and thoroughly developing the analytical ideas that come out of it. It connects back to those ideas from Spradley and Bernard about deep description and analysis.
Wow. Okay. This is all incredibly thorough. So, stepping back, how does all this detailed qualitative work contribute specifically to missiology, especially today with the world changing so fast?
Well, it's becoming more and more vital, really. Qualitative research gives us the tools to get a deeper, more nuanced understanding of today's complex realities.
Like what?
Things like rapid urbanization, globalization, the rise of pluralism, religious and cultural, the impact of technology. Everything's interconnected and shifting.
And old approaches might not work anymore.
Exactly. It helps us move beyond ways of doing mission that might be rooted in, frankly, colonial or neo-colonial ways of thinking, which can be harmful. Rigorous research helps the church stay relevant and actually understand what's going on.
So it informs practice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Missionaries, church leaders, they can use these methods to help local believers figure out how to bring Scripture into conversation with their own specific socio-religious world. Some call it developing theology from below, alongside theology from above. The key is avoiding outdated, potentially damaging approaches.
So understanding the local context helps make universal truths relevant there.
Precisely. Qualitative research helps outsiders learn from the local, emic perspective about God, about Scripture. And that, in turn, enriches everyone's understanding, the broader etic view of God's plan for humanity and all its amazing diversity.
Like the Samo example again, understanding Paul through their lens of spiritual warfare.
Exactly. Their understanding, shaped by their context, actually shed new light on Paul's writings. And the questions they ask themselves, like how to draw the Spirit's attention away from people and towards Christ, those kinds of questions only arise from deep contextual engagement.
It shows the value of that local perspective.
Absolutely. It deepens our appreciation for how diverse humanity's relationship with God can be. It echoes that vision in Revelation 7, doesn't it? That huge crowd from every nation, tribe, people, and language.
That's a powerful connection. Now, our source also mentioned a table, Table 12, that summarizes these three methods. What kind of things does it compare? Sounds useful.
Oh, it's very useful. Table 12 gives you a really concise snapshot, comparing observation and questions, interviews, and focus groups across a bunch of key factors.
Like what?
Things like the different sub-methods under each main type, their key features, where they're usually done, some key authors associated with them, what each method really emphasizes.
Okay.
Also, the kinds of research questions they're best for, how much control the researcher has, the typical data you get, descriptions, opinions, group dynamics, their strengths, their weaknesses.
Wow, comprehensive.
Yeah, even things like the quantity versus quality of data, ideal group size for focus groups, and the basic assumptions behind each method. It's a really practical tool if you're trying to decide which approach fits your research best. It might highlight, for instance, that focus groups are great for group dynamics, but maybe less so for deep individual insights compared to interviews.
Very helpful. And finally, the source just touched on case studies. How do they relate to these three methods?
Right. Case studies often pull all three of these methods together, observation, interviews, focus groups, but they do it within a specific, clearly defined case.
Like studying one particular program or event or person?
Exactly. It's an in-depth inquiry into a bounded system aiming to answer those what, how, and why questions about that specific case, but without the researcher trying to control things. It gives you that holistic deep dive into one particular instance or situation.
Okay. This has been incredibly illuminating, a real deep dive into these qualitative methods in missiology. It's so clear that understanding different cultures isn't just about looking, it's about careful choices and how you look and listen.
And that commitment to understanding the emic perspective, the insider view.
Absolutely, it demands really deliberate methodology.
Definitely. And hopefully this discussion gives you, the listener, a framework for appreciating just how complex research can be and why choosing the right tools is just so crucial for getting insights that are both meaningful and, well, trustworthy.
Couldn't agree more. So here's a final thought for you to ponder. Thinking about all these different perspectives and research methods we've discussed today, what are some assumptions you might hold, maybe about another culture or group, that could actually benefit from a bit more of this deep qualitative exploration?
Yeah, how could actively trying to understand from the inside, using these kinds of approaches, give you a richer, maybe more accurate picture of the world and the amazing variety of people in it?
Something to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.